news epicenter at these times on CNN News 18.
Banking partner IDFC First Bank. Always you first. Advisory partner Dhruva Advisors.
Welcome back. You're watching the CNBC TV18 Budget Townhall, and it's time now for us to welcome on the program the CBDT Chairman, Mr. P.C. Modi. Also with us, Dinesh Kanabar, Rashesh Shah and Mukesh Bhutani. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us here. Mr. Modi, there's lots of questions for you, sir. Dinesh Kanabar had one, so let me go straight back to him. Mr. Kanabar, you now have the CBDT Chief, and you heard from the Finance Secretary that make your representation to the CBDT Chairman, so go ahead, sir.
The questions which I had for you is with such a nice budget, such a nice background, right direction, there are a few things which have been done, which in my view could have been probably approached slightly differently. So for example, sir, we have yet to see the changes that may be required to the Act, given the fact that there are many people in India on account of inability to move out because of COVID. And we need to sort of relook at how India will approach permanent establishment, place of effective management, business connection. So while we made some changes earlier on with regard to the taxation of the individuals, we haven't sort of addressed this larger issue which OECD has recommended. Also, there was this change with regard to not allowing depreciation on goodwill, which is sort of overturning a Supreme Court judgment on the issue. The way the definition has been worded, there seems to be some sort of a gray area as to how much retrospective is it, because the definition is way back from 1998, whereas the application is prospective. I wanted to know if there were some thought processes in this regard.
Ani, so far as the issue of permanent establishment or the period of stay, creating some sort of a permanent establishment, you would recall that in the past, in the last financial year, we did come out with a beneficial circular. Of course, that circular is yet to come so far as this year is concerned, because I would expect the normalcy to return first, and when the international travel is again allowed, I think that is the time when we can take a good call as to what should be included and what should be excluded. But such a consideration can take place only once the normalcy returns. So far as question on depreciation on goodwill was concerned, I think it was more of an anti-abuse provision. The instances which had come to our notice in the past did indicate that it was not the intention ever that such a kind of provision should be kept in place. Moreover, wherever the goodwill has been acquired, and that cost of acquisition is well recognized, it is only in question of an artificial creation of the differential which is termed as goodwill. That is the question.
One simple exception which I think, sir, has been left out is that a lot of corporates have been spending money on COVID relief. Why not just make that expenditure tax deductible? This is expenditure which is corporates working shoulder to shoulder with the government. We are not asking for any incentive, no weighted deduction, no nothing. But if corporates spend money on COVID relief, whether it is to their employees or elsewhere, that expenditure being fully deductible is only a very fair ask.
We want to move away from the regime of deductions and exemptions and give a much competitive tax structure in terms of rates, and try to make it as stable as we can. But certainly deductions and exemptions through the taxation route should really be done away with in a phased manner as we are doing it right now.
Mr. Modi, it's always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV18 and appreciate your time. You're watching the Budget Town Hall here on CNBC TV18 and we're in conversation with the DPAM Secretary, Mr. Tuhin Kanta Pandey. Mr. Pandey, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV18. Let me ask you to first give us clarity, sir, on what has been promised for the last year, and that is IDBI Bank. When can we expect this process to move forward? Will you be inviting EOIs for IDBI Bank? How is it going to work?
Well, I think the IDBI Bank was announced last budget. Thereafter, we have looked at, the various legal issues involved. And I think we need an amendment of legislation, and that has been taken forward in this Finance Act, which requires a license to be continued under the IDBI Repeal Act after the disinvestment as well. And I think that was a major issue, and we should be moving forward soon on that.
Okay, so as far as IDBI Bank is concerned, the passage of the Finance Act will be all that is required in terms of legislative changes. No other legislative change will be required.
That's right. And I think then we have to take a cabinet approval and move forward.
Okay, and you will be inviting expressions of interest for the same?
Well, I think once the cabinet takes a decision, we'll move forward.
Okay, once the cabinet takes a decision, you'll move forward. Let me now talk to you, because we've got a banker here with us, Vivandan Datta of IDFC Bank, watching what you're saying very closely. And, this was a question that was raised earlier on the program as well. While the intent has been made in the budget on the privatization of 2 public sector banks as well as 1 general insurance company, there is no timeline that has been specified. So what is the target that you're working with in terms of being able to get this done? Because this doesn't come under the 1.75 lakh crore disinvestment target that's been set out by the government.
I think the Department of Financial Services will be taking a call soon on that, and that will also require a legislative change so far as the banks are concerned.
And do you feel confident now about LIC IPO, sir? Because, that was a promise made in the last budget. You've only now moved towards, the process of appointing advisors and so on and so forth. So how confident do you feel about the LIC IPO going through?
Yeah, I think the announcement by the Honorable FM in the last budget, the various issues were to be sorted, so the advisors were appointed, and I think they have done a fantastic job of identifying all those issues on which LIC is to work with. So we have also appointed the independent actuarial firm, which will have to report the Indian embedded value, which is a requisite thing for the IPO. LIC is separately working on several of those things which need to be enabled before the IPO in place, and the amendment has also been on the LIC Act for the purpose of IPO has been a part of the Finance Act as well. So I think the work is going on all sides, and we hope to have an IPO in FY 21-22 as announced by FM in the budget speech.
Okay, so you're hoping that it will fructify in this financial year. Let me also welcome the DFS Secretary into the conversation. Many thanks once again for joining us here on the program, sir. And many questions have come in on the ARC AMC. In fact, this is what we are picking up, and I would hope that you can give us more clarity on what we've already discussed. Banking sources suggest that the ARC AMC will clean up NPAs and may require about 10,500 crore rupees of capital. The ARC may buy large stressed assets of at least 1.4 to 1.5 lakh crore from banks. Can you take us through some of the details, sir?
Yes. So what the bankers are actually looking at is that there are about more than 2 lakh crores of legacy NPAs, which is sitting with the banks, and the resolution is taking time. Now, multiple lenders, so there is no unanimity of the decision, and therefore it delays things, and the resolution, there is an erosion in value of the assets. So ultimately the lenders are going to be the losers. So what they have now decided is to set up an entity which will be an ARC and an AMC. What does the ARC do? That the ARC warehouses all these stressed assets. And as you have rightly pointed out, these are assets which are more complex and which are of the ticket size of more than 500 crores. So these are large assets and complex assets. So it requires, the domain expertise to resolve them as well. So the idea is to move these assets. If all the banks, the private and public, put together, which are the consortium which have lent to these projects, the average holding is about 80% will be with the public sector banks and 20% with the private sector banks. So what they propose to do is move these assets to this ARC, and thereafter it moves to the AMC. The AMC in the interim will try to operate those projects, those assets, and thereafter through a market price discovery mechanism dispose it off either to a potential investor or to a AIF. So the whole idea here is what is happening is the consolidation. Otherwise one individual lender can say, sorry, I don't want to go with you, then it gets stuck. So as a result it may take 8 years, 10 years to resolve, and by that time the value would erode. So here the whole idea is that all are getting together, so it moves to the ARC and then to the AMC. AMC with a team of dedicated professionals operate it, preserve the value or even enhance the value, and then sell it off. So the aggregation happens, and there is a time-bound resolution of these assets. So that is the whole concept behind this AR-AMC.
All new Safari, test drive and booking open. Delivery start 22nd February. Reclaim your life.
हेलो मिस्टर पाई।
यस
सर, आपने 2004 में एक इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी ली थी, तो 2019 में मैच्योर हो गई।
याद नहीं आ रहा है
सर। 93,000 रुपीज मिल रहे हैं आपको।
लेट मी चेक।
आज एक्सपायर हो जाएगा सर।
आप कुछ कीजिए ना।
श्योर सर। डेट ऑफ बर्थ बताइए।
3rd Jan 1965।
एक वेरिफिकेशन कोड आया होगा, वो बताइए।
9064।
पर्सनल डिटेल्स और OTP मिल गया।
अब पैसे आएंगे।
काम हो गया है सर।
हो गया सर, हो गया।
थैंक यू। ये हेलो,
पैसे नहीं आए?
नहीं आए मतलब
सिर्फ एयरटेल पेमेंट्स बैंक पे कोई भी पेमेंट से पहले आपके एयरटेल नंबर पे एक और मैसेज आएगा। तो अब कंट्रोल चीटर्स के हाथों में नहीं, आपके हाथों में है। एयरटेल सेफ पे, पेमेंट का सेफेस्ट तरीका।
Beautiful.
Exactly.
Mehendi. This is thoughtful.
Hindware Italian Collection.
An interactive show for aspiring investors. Learn from the masters of the markets with live masterclasses.
One should not get carried away too much by the up move in the market, and one should make sure that they are invested in quality companies.
Value investing insights.
If biggest pandemic in a century doesn't give you better prices, imagine how futile timing the market is.
And time-tested strategies to identify profitable stocks and businesses.
The only mantra is to figure out which are the investable opportunities where risk, reward and asymmetric payoff possibilities are on your side.
A one-of-a-kind investment ready radar. CNBC TV18 Investment Guide.
Entrepreneurship is about seeing opportunities that others do not see. I would tell entrepreneurs to go ahead and explore.
And an economic shakedown is usually when you see the strong emerge, deal with it not the way you wish it was, but the way it is, and then position for the future.
We've always chased value. We've never chased valuation, and that's what this show is about.
India's most credible thought leadership platform and the world's longest running show on startups and entrepreneurship. Young Turks. Tune in, scale up, stand out at these times. India's most iconic market show, Reloaded. With cutting-edge market analysis that goes deep and cuts through the noise. To bring you what's trending, what's buzzing, and where the opportunities are. With the most experienced team in the business. Bazaar Morning Call. Every weekday on CNBC TV18 and CNBCTV18.com.
You've presented this budget in the backdrop of a once-in-a-century pandemic. What were you really thinking about when you were framing this budget?
If I don't spend now, I will only be postponing the growth. And I certainly didn't want to fund this whole operation through taxation.
Nirmala ji, there is a little bit of confusion around the agri-infra cess.
The end consumer or the importer is not going to pay 1 rupee more.
Why do you think that, farmers doubt the intent of this government?
I honestly want them to come and specify where does the problem lie.
DFS Secretary, let me come back to you now and ask you about the timeline that, in your opinion or estimate, would be a realistic one to get the process of privatization of the two banks as and when you decide to identify them up and running. What kind of legislative changes will be required? I would imagine the Bank Nationalization Act. If you can take us through what we should expect and give some clarity on the roadmap.
Regarding identifying the banks which are to be privatized, there is already a clear-cut policy laid down by the government very recently, and it has to go through 3 committees. First it will be the NITI, then it goes to the committee of the group of secretaries on disinvestment, and thereafter it goes to the alternate mechanism. So obviously these committees will look into the pros, cons, and do all the evaluation and arrive at a identifying which are the banks, and it will be taken, decision taken at the highest level. So that process will also begin parallelly. And as far as the legislative amendments are concerned, you have named those 2 acts are the principal acts. So we look at those. We have already started working on that, and wherever the amendments are required, we will make the necessary amendments to facilitate the privatization process. And the same would apply also for the insurance company. And when do you hope to move the amendments? I cannot give a timeline straight away right now, because these are just early days. The announcement has been made only yesterday. So we will obviously, go into the details and work out everything and try to take it forward as fast as possible.
Okay, gentlemen, we've also got Mr. Vivandan Datta of IDFC First Bank with us. Mr. Vaidyanathan, go ahead with your questions for the DPAM and the DFS secretaries.
I didn't think of a question until you lobbed it at me just now, but I have a comment actually to make. We saw DFS secretary in action when the emergency credit guarantee line was being implemented, and it was a very important program to be done with a lot of detail, and we saw the level of detail he could get into and the kind of a kind of rigor he has to make things happen. So, of all divestments, privatization of state-owned banks is one of the toughest tasks to do, because the number of complications involved, a number of parties involved here. I'm pretty sure, having seen him at work, there's no doubt the government will pull it off really very well. And second thing I want to say is that this is a landmark event. The other divestments are a divestment, but state-owned bank divestment is a big statement and compliments.
Well, DFS Secretary, let me ask you, what are the challenges that you foresee? The legislative process, of course, will have its own, complexities to deal with, but what are some of the challenges that you foresee as you move down this road? For instance, today the Swadeshi Jagran Manch has come out and issued a statement saying that they don't welcome the government's decision to privatize the banks and the insurance company. So what kind of complexities and challenges do you envisage on this front?
As Mr. Vaidyanathan pointed out, this is for the first time we will be going in for such kind of a privatization. I don't think it has happened in the past. Banks have either been amalgamated or reconstructed, but never a privatization of this sort has happened. So it is definitely a challenge, and there are complexities. There are lots of issues which we need to factor in as we go along. And of course, legislative amendments or changes will enable moving forward in this direction. But there may be other issues also which I cannot at the moment foresee and spell out everything. But as we go along, we will list out what are the other issues that we need to look into. And of course, we will be working closely with DPAM to see that the maximum value is extracted, as far as the government is concerned. So that's how we propose to proceed.
Mr. Pandey, the same question to you. As you move forward on this path of strategic disinvestment, the good thing is that there is now a policy in place which lays out a process. But what do you believe will be the big challenges and complexities that you're going to have to deal with as you move forward on strategic disinvestment?
Well, I think the new policy which FM has announced is quite a landmark policy, probably after 91 reforms. A very clear statement that the government would actually retain a bare minimum presence in a set of strategic sectors which have been identified based on national security, energy security, critical infrastructure and financial services, and leave the rest and exit the rest. Even in the strategic sector, it's only the bare minimum presence. So it's basically a statement of intent that in a way there was decades of nationalization, and there could be now Indian economy and Indian system mature to a stage when we are aspiring to be a 5 trillion economy, is to embark on a path which will charter a new beginning for Atmanirbhar Bharat. Basically trying to maximize growth, trying to maximize production, productivity, efficiency, and growth and employment. So this is a policy which will actually guide over the next few years, is how we would be putting our strategic disinvestment program on focus, because I think in many respects that's a program which will take us forward on the growth path.
Yes, and of course there is also going to be coordination between various ministries when it comes to things like land monetization, etc. But DFS Secretary, I wanted a clarification, because people have been listening into you and tweeting me, asking me, are you sure about the 100 crore rupee capital requirement? Because the expectation was that it would require significantly higher capital support to get started, the ARC structure.
No, you see, what I just mentioned was it is a 15%, 85% cash and SR deal. Right, 15% is the cash deal, so that becomes a cash neutral for the banks. They put in that money and they get it back. 85% of the net book value is what will be issued in the form of SRs. Right, so there is no involvement of any kind of cash that is required. So after that, whatever provisioning has to be made for that value, the net asset value rather, will have to be made by the banks, for which the regulator may ask the banks to make the provision. Now the banks, some of them, as I said, have already provided up to 100, and for some assets it's up to 80. So another 20% may be required to be provided by the banks, for which the banks may come to the government to extend some kind of support by way of capital or by way of a guarantee also. So even a guarantee could help to satisfy the regulator that in the event of they are unable to make that provision, the government will chip in to provide that capital. So therefore it begins with a cash neutral solution to the problem, and thereafter the money which comes back into the system is something which the banks are going to gain for assets which are lying idle for quite a long period of time. These are all legacy NPAs. So that's how it works.
Thank you very much, Secretaries, for joining us here today to explain and give more color on some of the crucial announcements that have been made in Budget 2021. I think the heavy lifting will have to be done by you two gentlemen to get some of the bold reforms promised in Budget 2021 off the ground. So appreciate you joining us here once again. Mr. Vaidyanathan, on balance, what do you make of what you've heard from all the secretaries, both in terms of intent as well as the execution roadmap?
First of all, a big vote of thanks and thanks to every one of the secretaries, Mr. Ajay Bhushan Pandey, Mr. Tarun Bajaj, PC Modi, Secretary DFS and other secretaries who spoke today so candidly and transparently and patiently answered the questions. Now, the key to your question about what struck out, there were 3-4 things that struck us from the budget. One was, the focus on ease of doing business. Second was serious investment on health, 50,000 crores, 35,000 crores, 2 lakh crores on production-linked incentives, inclusive development, R&D, etc. FDI insurance. There were so many things here that, it's difficult to encapsulate them all. But the key one that really struck a big note was the boldness with which they said IPO of LIC, IPO and, privatization of 2 state-owned banks, 1 general insurance, Air India, BPCL, Pawan Hans, IDBI. When you see that sort of talk being done, it's never been done in 50 years, Shireen, just to point out, never been done in 50 years. Nobody uttered the word privatization of banks before. It's a very big statement. And therefore, that boldness stood out. The second thing is that I think, from the Prime Minister, Finance Minister and all the secretaries who worked on it, really the boldness stood out. The other thing is that now that the other really amazing thing they've done, I feel, is that knowing fully well that they've got to sell, they never disturbed the markets. They kept the markets happy and going and motivated and didn't touch any tax structures. I think one of the plans of divestment should have been to also keep the markets buoyant. And I think on that front, they've achieved huge success already to start with. The third thing that comes to my mind is that is really that our expectation now that this bold one, agriculture has been announced, dealing with it. I'm sure they'll solve it. Privatization, state-owned banks, etc. Yeah. With this, expectations have gone up. I say, and it's a very big thing because now we know this government is really very bold. They can do bold things. So we feel very proud and thrilled as Indians that our government can also do these things, and we can match other countries and say, here we come. So we expect a lot because of what you've shown. Thank you very much from all of us.
Well, Mr. Vaidyanathan, many thanks for that comment, and many thanks again to the secretaries for joining us here on the CNBC TV 18 Budget Town Hall. We appreciate your time and we wish you the very best of luck. We are going to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a moment.
Banking partner, IDFC First Bank. Always you first. Advisory partner, Dhruva Advisors.
ये स्टांस है, ये ग्लांस है, लॉक स्क्रीन पे ऑसम गेम्स ग्लांस आपके फोन में है क्या?
You've presented this budget in the backdrop of a once-in-a-century pandemic. What were you really thinking about when you were framing this budget?
If I don't spend now, I will only be postponing the growth. And I certainly didn't want to fund this whole operation through taxation.
Nirmala ji, there is a little bit of confusion around the agri-infra cess.
The end consumer or the importer is not going to pay 1 rupee more.
Why do you think that, farmers doubt the intent of this government?
I honestly want them to come and specify where does the problem lie.
Are you somewhere worried that some vested interests are sort of guiding the farmers on this? How do you respond to what the NC and the PDP are saying? You're using corruption as a red herring to divert from the real issue, which is abrogation of Article 370. The right to choose your own partner is a fundamental right. How will this new law stand the test of courts?
Gross Tax, weeknights at 8:57 on CNN News 18.
This is TV18 and you're watching CNBC TV18.